The missiles cost more than the drones they destroyed, and that was the point. This wasn't chaos, it was choreography. 2 decoys soaked up 57 E6 interceptors, while the real daggers slipped through a radar scissor the defenders never saw coming. We'll walk you minute by minute through the 8-drone wolf pack that turned a jet fuel linchpin into a firestorm. See how a wounded airframe still delivered a Monroe-effect warhead that set off volatile precursors, and why that mattered far beyond the blast. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. They didn't pick the biggest target, they picked the one that would ripple through everything else. The Agodol 100 jet fuel plant sat on a thin rail spur with one way in and one way out, feeding Siberian aviation hubs that live on schedule and temperature. At 3:12 a.m., when the night shift is counting minutes and the day crew hasn't arrived, alarms get fewer eyes. That window matters. The claim is simple. This plant made a key additive that keeps jet fuel flowing at deep sub-zero, the kind where steel sounds different and seals crack. Safety interlocks guarded the process, but those same interlocks can halt production for days after a disruption. That's why this plant, and that's why the launch time. Now the numbers. Some voices put the damage at up to a fifth of domestic jet fuel output when you include the additive bottleneck. Others say that's padded. For the next 30 minutes, the only numbers that matter are throughput and time to recover. If an additive line goes cold, tanks and pipes need cleaning, purity checks, restart procedures, and rail schedules scramble. Even if the headline percentage is high or low, the effect lands on sorties, not spreadsheets, because those hubs depend on predictable flows, and any hiccup multiplies down the line. The attackers moved with roles locked in, 8 drones, each with a job written in before they left the cradle. 2 were sacrificial decoys trained to look juicy on radar. 4 carried the tools to hurt metal and chemistry. 2 more existed to bend the defender's view, cutting across beams and teasing seekers into false tracks. This isn't new theatre. In Syria and in Nagorno-Karabakh, cheap airframes forced air defences to spend hard cash on interceptors, and when you make a defender pay that bill repeatedly, the system starts choosing wrong targets under pressure. The clock favoured them. Subzero air drops thermal signatures and tightens blades and bearings. Cold, dense air also affects radar at short ranges, changing how low-altitude returns pop in and out near clutter. Shift changes at heavy industry come with predictable lulls. Logbooks signed, radios swapped, patrols turning corners. Overhead, the sky is quieter, but electronics still hum. That's where timing buys more than speed ever could. Ghost mode sounded flashy, but the idea was simple. When GPS goes dark under jamming, the drones didn't quit. They leaned on inertial sensors and visual cues baked into their navigation. Roads, power lines, river bends, and the persistent shapes of industrial rooftops can hold a heading long enough to bridge a jam zone. With short hops between fixes and a stable platform, you don't need perfect accuracy to cross the outer ring. You just need to be close enough that the defender has to react. The plant's guard had teeth. A Pantsir S1 watched the approaches, and a convoy radar upstream picked up movement. 2 57 E6 missiles snapped off the rails at Mach 4. The screen lit, and now the commander had seconds to pick targets. Which blip gets a missile and which gets the gun, which track is a decoy, and which holds a shaped charge. That's the trap. When million-dollar shots chase cheap airframes, the math turns into strategy. Those decoys weren't insurance, they were the key. Spending millions to erase drones that cost orders of magnitude less buys a hole, not safety. While the interceptors arced out, the others slid into the seam, using electronic misdirection and radar shearing to split the defender's focus just long enough. The payoff sat in that gap. But the fight didn't end at the fence line. With the outer ring distracted, the inner defenses kept their edge. Guns still had angles, jammers still had power. Inside the perimeter, the antennas get dense, barrels track fast, and every second closer to the tank farm narrows the path and raises the stakes. 7 scopes white out at once, and the map turns into a hole. The jamming bubble blooms over the approach, and every GPS feed staggers. So how does a single wounded airframe still find steel? The swarm shifts from satellite fixes to what they packed for this exact moment. Terrain following and passive cues. Barometric altimeters hold altitude over the rail cut. Optical flow tracks the grain of the snow lines and shadow edges along the pipeline berm. Magnetometers steady the nose when the compass needle twitches. They only need a minute or 2 inside the bubble to resync on the other side, and that minute is already paid for by the decoys. Reapers 5 and 6 go loud on purpose. They climb into the cleanest slice of sky and throw infrared flares to make the seeker heads choose them. The radar return from a climbing target is easy to love. Steady, bright, predictable. Two 57E6s lock, launch, and chase. Both decoys keep their throttle where it needs to be to look real, riding a straight line that gives the fire control loop nothing to doubt. Digital Suicide buys the rest of the pack a corridor, and it buys it now. Reapers 7 and 8 run the scissor. One drifts 5 knots fast, the other 5 knots slow, with headings offset by a few degrees. That offset bends the Doppler math the seeker expects, splitting the track file for a heartbeat. The radar tries to fuse the ghosts and hesitates. In that hesitation, lock quality falls through the floor. It's not magic, it is timing and angles that bruise the algorithm just long enough for 4 airframes to slip inside the inner ring. The guns wake. A 30mm burst chews the air, inches off Reaper 1's left wing. It snaps a micro-maneuver, a 2-degree bank and a small throttle blip, and stays alive. Fragments rake across Reaper 2. Aileron skin tears, one prop blade nicks and goes out of true. Sensors shake and the inertial unit spits noise, but flight control keeps authority. Small quad and fixed-wing hybrids can eat partial damage and keep going. Test ranges and field reports show drones flying home on a clipped wing or finishing runs with a vibrating prop and half a camera. The onboard brain sees it in milliseconds. Reaper 3's pathway crosses a new lobe of jamming and its primary window closes. Priority shifts. Reaper 2, hurt and jittering, takes the strike roll. The autopilot damps the vibration as far as it can and narrows the tolerance band on the aim. Reaper 1 now becomes feeder and spotter, riding high enough to mark the silhouette of the housing as the blackout rolls through the yard. The run-in is low and straight, slow enough to keep the nose steady, fast enough to keep the burst window short. The charge isn't about blast, it's about focus. A shaped liner forms the jet that drills through thin steel and finds the reactive mix. The impact is surgical. The copper jet cuts a path, and hypergolic contact turns a clean puncture into ignition that feeds itself on what it touches. Heat climbs, pressure builds, and the tank farm writes its own chemistry lesson. Power snaps off as Reaper 2 slams the substation, tearing transformers and breaking trunk lines. Darkness covers the plant. Reaper 4 drives into the storage block and ruptures tanks stacked with ammonia and solvents. Flames turn stubborn. Fire teams hit one pocket and the next one lights from vapor spread and runoff that finds a low point. Sirens rise across the airfield grid and departure boards in other cities start to slip even before dawn because the rail schedules that feed them just lost their anchor. One strike forced $1 million intercepts, slipped a wounded airframe through chaos, and turned chemicals into a supply shock. That's how asymmetry looks at 3:12 a.m. The cost curve bent, not in theory, but on a live board where rail timetables and sortie counts missed their marks by sunrise. Tell us, if you were on the console, would you hit the reload yard or the pilot barracks next? And why? Your answer shapes how defenders spend tomorrow's budget. Subscribe for the follow-up. We'll map the ripple effects on fuel rails, sortie rates, and the next move in the drone cost chess game as the countermeasures get priced in.